Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Muslim Jallo, the president of the US chapter APP Sobeyaa, and our guest today is Oz Bobb, the spokesperson of APP Sobeyaa. We are glad to have you here, Oz. And my colleague on this show today is Khadija Toure. I will pass it over to you, Khadija.
Hello, everyone. My name is Khadija Toure. I am the Human Resources Executive at Sobeyaa, and I will be starting us off today. Our guest, Bob, I'd like to ask you the first question. Could you please give us a brief introduction about yourself and your current role?
Thank you, Muslim and Khadija. Thank you for extending this invitation to myself. And thank you also for the important role that you hold in the party and the things that you've been doing. Very commendable. My name is Ousainou Bobb, and everyone calls me Bob, so it kind of overshadowed my bad name, which I'm happy to answer to. I am the spokesperson for APP Sobeyaa, a role that I have picked on since Congress in December 2024 in Farafenni. It is a challenging role, but worthy of it as we do in service to our country and party. And I am very much happy to have a conversation with all of you today.
Thank you so much, Bob, for explaining to us what your current role is. But I'd like to ask you, where exactly are you from in Gambia specifically?
Thank you. I was born in Farafenni, so I'm a Badibunka. My mom is from Farafenni and my dad is from Banjul, Perseverance. My dad moved to NBR, Farafenni, in the 70s, and that subsequently led to what happened until I'm here today. so I spent my childhood in Farafenni. That's where I did my primary education, secondary education, and before moving back to the coast, that's where I started my higher education. And initially started studying engineering. Started with GTTI, where I did electrical engineering to a diploma level, and transitioned to working as a field worker with MRC for a couple of years, working in the provinces under the Demographic Surveillance System project. And eventually I started working for NAWEC, where I did further my engineering education to a notch up. I did mechanical engineering with NAWEC under the apprenticeship scheme to an OND level. And shortly after 2017, I've moved to the UK on resettlement purposes. And because I've already entered into politics then, I've always had this doctrine like, at least if I'm going to bullshit people, excuse the French, it has to be something that is backed by fact and knowledge. If I am criticizing or critiquing people that are in politics that they have no idea what they're talking about, they are empty when it comes to complex social and political issues. And I have to be different. I have to learn the trade. I have to know the trade. I've always believed it's a science that led me to completely shift from higher education, from the science and technology to humanities studies. I enrolled for my bachelor's program at the University of Brighton, where I graduated with honors first class in applied philosophy, politics, and ethics. And from that point on, I went on to do my master's in governance and corruption. It's a master's of choice. I wanted to actually understand one of the most prolific issues facing our country right now, which is corruption. How do I help? How do I address this situation? What can I do to help? But in order to help, you need to understand what is happening. You need to understand what is corruption. You need to be able to identify all the indicators in order to be able to effectively propose or implement reforms towards addressing it. It was a research project that I actually enjoyed doing and graduated also with honors. So in short, it's also quite a long journey, not straightforward, but being everywhere.
Okay, awesome. So I wanted to ask you our next question. What inspired you to take this role in politics? And who or what has most influenced your political beliefs and values?
I would say activism and student leadership. I was the head boy of my high school, and unfortunately, on my part, we also had a little bit of an issue with the management in terms of student management and student welfare. So that was the first protest that I led. And we also wanted to protect some of our colleagues then that had a problem with the then school principal. From high school, I went to GTTI and got involved into tertiary education, student politics. I was the Secretary General of GTTI Student Union and also co-opted member of the National Student Union. From there, we did a lot of activism and a lot of engagement in terms of student welfare. We try to introduce reforms. My arguments then have always been, what happened after we graduate? Most of us come from poor backgrounds. If I studied engineering or mechanics or welding, where do I get the started capital to be able to start contributing to society? Do I only have to be employed in order to be able to contribute meaningfully? How do I utilize the skills that I am learning? And it earns me favorable standing with most of my colleagues and peers during that time. And what inspired me truly to get into national politics, it's when I started working with MRC. I wouldn't say I was born privileged, but I was also oblivious about some of these, conditions that are happening within the rural Gambia and some of the things that I believed until then our country has evolved or passed in terms of development. When I started working for MRC as a field worker, it exposes me to the realities of, Gambia, especially rural Gambia. And I grew to love the role, not because I was doing field working, but I loved the role because the interaction it brings and the knowledge it also brings. That raw knowledge of learning some of the cultures, some of the things that made us who we are as Gambians, some of the way we think, the way we solve problems at the community level, the collectiveness, the way we face these challenges. It truly inspired me to go into foundational work, into charity work, into giving back to my community, and that led to the establishment of my charitable foundation in order to give back to our community, not only through material donation and rebuilding lives, but also through volunteerism. And we've done a lot of community development projects ranging from boreholes, ranging from school upliftment programs, face upliftment programs and madrasas. All these kind of things was just inspired by my experience as a field worker. In terms of politics, I was quite keen and interested when Obama came into power. He was different. He was actually different. And it kind of propelled me to start reading his books, The Audacity of Hope. I even have one of his books just behind me. And to be able to break that barrier, to be able to be bold enough, despite the differences, despite the obvious that I have to go and get this. I will not wait for someone to hand it over to me. It has to be done, and it is me that is going to lead this way. It was quite inspiring, and I wanted something similar, not actually to go into politics in Gambia, but at least to inspire the younger people to be able to have that love for country, to be able to be bold enough to say we are going to be change makers. So in 2017, the youths of NBR, Farafina to be specific, approached me and said, look, we want you to represent us as our independent candidate in these parliamentary elections. And I was like, man, we all broke. We flop attire. you know, how are we going to challenge the establishment? And they was like, we can do it, Bob. People listening to you, you inspired your colleagues, and let's give it a shot. No one at your age or our age has ever attempted to contest for election in our region. We need to break that stereotype. We need to get involved. And it was entirely funded by my peers, and the youths of Farafenye. At the later part, we had the support and contribution of Haruna Drame, who fell in love with our vision, heard about us, and some Sanasar from the US, the Citizen First, they also came in. I was like, we've listened to all 54 candidates, but you're different, Bob. We can call you a politician, and we don't know what to call you. You're completely different, so we're just happy. And it was quite an eye opening. We campaign not on the premises that we just want to win, but we campaign on the premises of what actually are people voting for? Why do you vote for an MP? Because these were the questions we were taking to the people to see if they actually understands that. Instead of going to all these villages with drums and all those things, we go and have an open banter bar. Like, do you know why you're voting for an MP? What is the role? What are you expecting? Are you expecting them to make pavement roads for you? Are you expecting them to bring boreholes? And it becomes a civic engagement, an educational platform that even those that we met in villages would say to us, for 50 years, every politician has come here and no one has ever explained these processes to us. And from there on, we build the Timber Foundation. It becomes a political movement. And until today, I am happy to report that political parties would pick candidates from my team to represent them, especially most recently the UDP uh, nominated MP for Ilyasa was my campaign spokesperson during that time. And yes, it is quite inspiring. I know it's a long one, but it's quite passionate that I have to put this forward.
Thank you very much, Oswald. That was a quite interesting background for you. And I've worked with you at certain capacity for a while, but I didn't know all of these things about you, which makes me even salute you more. And thank you for sharing that with us and our viewers here. My next question is: you are the PRO of APP Sobeyaa, which many people knows what that role entails. But working with you, like I mentioned quite a little earlier, I know you are a heavy lifter in the party. What is some of your roles that you do to bridge between the party and the public, and what is other responsibilities that you hold?
Right. Politics, it's communication, Musa, Muslim, and it revolves around communication. It revolves around ideologies. And one of my professors would usually say, the best speaker is someone that can present a very complex issue to a 5-year-old toddler, and that person particularly understands that. And when I was doing my research, you always said, explain it to me as if I've not even been, like I'm not your lecturer. And these are some of the facets that I bring into the communication aspect of our party. How do we communicate to Gambians about things that really matters to them? How do we make governance such a transparent and such an understandable topic that they will be able to make an informed decision and choice based on what the available information is. And my role with APP Sobeyaa did not only revolves around writing statements and appearing in media, but I'm also part of the strategic team. How do we govern? Because these are areas that I have very strong sense of attachment towards that. And it is quite an important role, but the difference I have learned in Sobeyaa is the dynamism that got involved. It is not only an individual service, or it is not only an individual arena where OSPOP as the spokesperson would have to say, this is how we have to communicate and this is how we have to do things. It is an ever learning trajectory that we have different people putting into the pots all the time, like how best do we sell these ideas? Muslim might have the best idea to communicate to a certain aspect of our society, and Muslim ideas would work. And Khadija might have the best ideas as to how do we present such a project to our audience, so to our voters, and then that would work. So that dynamism has also helped a lot in my career and in my growth and the people that I am working with. So our role involves communication strategy, but most importantly, how do we orient Sobeyaa and APP Sobeyaa to a party of party for Gambian people, the party for the average person, the party for the person that's, has only been to madrasa, you know, the how do we make it unique and how do we make it complete with all inclusiveness, so which is quite important.
Thank you very much, Osborne Jarajev. I'm tempted to ask, Moine, since you are a PRO bi, you are the Wahal party bi, Tory party bi, gis nañ ne recently Gambians are fed up about what is happening. Dañ bugg a change. Dañ feel like ne is way past overdue for new change government bi. And gis nañ tamit very commendable actions from Gambians. My different entities come together to form a coalition or to form coalitions. And we understand that is happening. And having the opportunity to have the PRO of the party here, some people are skeptical about it, but some people are very optimistic that Gambians see techniques and differences, or they are ñu ngi teg seen difference ñu ngi toog waxtaan naka la ñoo amee coalition to bring a change. Coalition bi nga xam ne dafa utee ak bu 2016 bi. To viewers, what can you tell us about that?
Interesting question, Muslim. I am also doubling as the lead negotiator for APP Sobeyaa, so it's kind of put me into the spotlight. But I would like to say, democracy, it's the competition of ideas. And as coalition talks, we in a democratic establishment, it is the competition of ideas. It is not, one man's will. No matter how ambitious you are, no matter how visionary you are towards leading Gambia, every man believes they have the best policies for Gambia. Every man believes they have the best programs for Gambia. But we are living in a democracy. So we have to go through a process of building a coalition because it's, the competition of ideas. And when we do that, we have to employ patience, tolerance, understanding. How, why is this particular party having such a position? And why is that particular person differing in such a position? Because if we do not have these fundamental understandings of our differences, then whatever we build will become a repetition of 2016. And we are trying to avoid that because we have learned from 2016. And I think most of my colleagues in the other parties and their lead negotiators have also learned from the process of 2016. And this time it's completely different because when we sit at a negotiating table, we do not discuss based on party lines. Most of our discussions are centered around Gambia and some of the prominent issues that our country is facing right now. How do we address security reforms? How do we address governance reform? How do we address corruption issues? How do we go into a collective governance methodology? So these are some of the discussions, and obviously politics would play because eventually we might select a leader and we would have to discuss the methodologies of selecting a flag bearer and all those things. And the reason why I am saying all this, it's just to also inject that hope to the Gambian people that not all our leaders are selfish and not all our leaders just want to lead and they're only interested in leading. The leaders that I am working with, these are people that actually have Gambia at heart. And, evidence of that, it's in the nature of the coalition building processes that we are building at the moment. And the second thing is probably a lot of people have that in mind when they hear about the different coalition building blocks that are happening in Gambia. And like I said, again, it's a democracy, it's competition of ideas. Like you might have the best ideas, but you have no right to force that ideas or will to other people. That's why it's a democracy. So you have to be patient, you have to be able to share your ideas, you have to be able to convince them that actually this is what we want because you will have a right and an entitlement as a Gambian to say, I want to be the president, I want to build a coalition in this format, and someone else might have different ideas. But what we're doing at the moment is how do we bring all these ideas together? And there have been significant progress in addressing all these challenges. And I am absolutely hopeful that we might have a unified coalition for Gambia. And despite all the talks on social media, all the different things, this party said no one is leading them. That party said they don't want an alignment. No, that's not going to happen. You cannot be definitive in politics because it's not static. politics is ever fluid. It involves managing human behavior, and we might wake up different tomorrow. But we are hopeful, as to all the indicators on the table at this particular moment, that there is going to be a coalition. It is going to be a coalition based on principle. It is going to be a coalition based on Gambia first, and it is going to be a coalition based on the reforms that our country desperately needed.
Thank you, Bob. That was a very powerful message for the Gambians, which I believe is going to leave Adama Barrow and his administration really panicking right now if a coalition happen, because it is very much needed. And that brings us to the next level, why coalition be might happen, meaning the things that are not going well in that country. I like your style, or APP Sobeyaa style, especially people like yourself who are in the media talking. Moine nekun di wax all the time. We don't dwell on the problems, which Gambia yep xam nañ what is the problem, right? But there is more of a solution basis, or lii la ñoo def. But even with that, I'm tempted to say, with an APP Sobeyaa government or SR-led coalition, right? What are two things that you would change immediately in how the government is going? And I will give a condition on that based on your introduction and your background. You mentioned that you studied corruption. So I would like you to touch at least a little bit of corruption, because I think it's endemic in that country.
Right. I think any Gambian that have been following politics in Gambia would absolutely answer this question, irrespective of their academic background. The two things that Gambia desperately needs is how government does business. We need to change that. You cannot keep doing things at the same level, at the same rate, and expect a different outcome. And what Sobeyaa and APP Sobeyaa is saying is, how do we put measures into what government does? And this, it's going to technically solve 80% of Gambia's problem at this particular moment. How do we put measures into the debt? How do we put measures into the projects that we implement? How do we put measures as to the efficiency output of each department, government department? And without these measures, it's like having a bottomless pit where you keep putting in resources and those resources keep disappearing and you keep wondering where are those resources. And I'll give you an example. We have a lot of good projects, and if you look at Gambia at the moment and you look at our good governance framework, these are non-translations. They came from the international best practice norms and all those things. If you look at it in text, you'll be like, Gambia, it's actually very good when you look at the governance tax. But the lived reality of the average Gambian would just tell you that's just a tax. What is happening? It's a hybrid system. A hybrid system that is neither theorized, no institutionalized, like it's just the lived reality. Everyone knows, well, this is how we do things, but where is it written? It's difficult to theorize. And in order to address all of these things, we need to start, putting measures into what we do. If we have a project, what could be the evaluation outcome? What would be the efficiency outcome of this project at the end of its project life cycle? If a government is requesting a budget to do whatever, what would be the impact measures of that particular budget and particular things? And once we introduce the concept of a measure, it addresses also the problems of wastage, the problems of corruption, the problems of theft rate, and all those things. Because eventually, any of these, if it's get introduced into the project or into the way the administration works, it affects the output measures. And if our ultimate goal is to have measurable deliverables for our projects, for our budgets, for our governance system, then these things start eliminating itself along the way. The other thing is the debt. How do we move away from debt services? Look, all of you there, Nakaleno move away from Sul Buki, Sule Buki. It cannot, eventually the last bookie is going to always be a problem because they had them put the last bookie with fake bookie with and then the whole thing, like a pyramid, it just crumbles down. Okay, so two things. Bena, the debt services. How do we move away from borrowing to start generating internally? How do we make sure we empower local businesses internally? How do we create a macroeconomic within the Gambia that it's able to sustain governance at this particular moment? So this is a crucial area that APP Sobeyaa is looking into, and these are some of the things that we are also introducing into our coalition talks. That this is our priority area. We have to look at the debt services, we have to brainstorm, and we have to look at it internally how to fix those issues. So the other issues, it's just introduce an evaluation and monitoring measures in everything that government does. I know it is a contentious issue when you talk about how big the government of the Gambia is, how we want to introduce a leaner governance and a more efficient government system. And a lot of people out there will be like, okay, so no, we are not saying that. And this is why I've always said in my interviews that we are going to introduce the three R's. We are going to retain, we are going to retrain, and we are going to repropose. Because we want every Gambian worker receiving salary from the state, every dollar that you receive, there should be an efficiency output matched to that dollar. Dollar bunla feni, what is the efficiency output of your work value? And once we are able to do this, then we are able to transform a lot of things in a very short period of time. Corruption, it's a very wide topic. And, I did my research on looking at the social norms, looking at norm translation, looking at why anti-corruption measures fail when you implement them in the global south. I did not only specifically look at Gambia, I looked at the Sahelian regions. I understand the different social aesthetics to it, the social norms, the norms of giving, the norms of reciprocity, the norms of, all these norms, they play a very major role into our institutions. And in order to effectively implement anti-corruption reforms, you need to understand what the problems are. You need to understand the pressures that the public officials have. How do we do it? Like and then most of the time it comes down to language and understanding. For instance, culturally, we accepted that giving someone attire money, it's a cultural favor. It brings in harmonious relationships and all those things. I come and visit Muslim and I'm like, general attire or Johare general attire. So it becomes culturally acceptable in our vocabulary and in our thinking. And now this has been adopted, to replace what bribery would actually look like in its real sense. You're driving in the Gambia, police officer will stop you. The first thing, so you are much more susceptible to accept that because it has a cultural connotation that's, has a moral, acceptability in your thinking. So shouldn't have lost money, bribe me $50. Or, you know, it's obvious. Like you can see how language also plays into all of this thing, and it works into our institutions. You go into any institutions, they will not be very deliberate. They'll be like, "Man, bro, buy fi attire. Wow, DK johal boy attire reg na then koto And these are things that people think they are very insignificant when they implement anti-corruption measures and anti-corruption reforms. But these are the very undermining indicators that makes the whole system, inapplicable. And we are going to implement all these reforms, and we understood the problems. I'm not going to generalize in that sense because most of the time, if you go in details or in depth, people become very scared. Like, okay, so you can so sit down and okay, domoroki je har foko taka fofu la mo lek na sa suñu dafa tej bunte yebwa fi ken du ñam ken du lifin. And you know how do you balance? And politics is about communication. How do you give assurance, but how do you also maintain your principle? How do you make sure that you respect the democratic principles and the democracy principles, which is a competition of ideas? And no matter how silly their ideas are, you have to respect that idea, but you also have to bring in other ideas to compete with that idea, and eventually they will see the logic in their idea as fallacious and start implementing a better ideas. So, in a nutshell, these are the two things, though the two areas that APP Sobeyaa is going to concentrate on: the debt services and the reforms within the way government does business.
Thank you very much, Osbo. And I will just add a little piggyback on a little bit of what you said about the debt service. at least having a background in that field, I think the trajectory that Gambia is going to, my bu fekkoon ne business I tell people ne ni kon Gambia would file for bankruptcy as a country. Uh, in a simple term, if you are in the Western financial system, fi nga xam ne balaa ñu laa jox debt da nga am a credit scores and credit score boobu noonu mooy determine ndax yow da nga mun a leb da nga mun a jël bor or not. Gambia fu mu toll nii ni kon suñ credit score bi will be at the very bottom duñ mun a am dara sax and su fekkoon ne bitik la dañoo tëj bitik bi defa karnaat sani caay bi si géej bi sax because that's where we are going to suñ moytu ñu change loolu in the next 5 to 10 years lu ñoo fay yëpp is all going to interest. So meaning na ñun even right now fu ñu nekk right in 500 years duñ mun a fay suñ bor bi because principal bi nekkuñ defa laal dara and every single year interest mu ngi yokkaat so su fekkee ne tey let's say for example to use some numbers easy numbers nit ñi understand su fekkee ne tey suñ debt bi is $100 la by next year dafa nekk 102 fekka yokkuñ fa dara sax jëlaanguñ dara sax every year mu ngi yokk because of interest bi ñu dee teg so I'm glad that you pointed that out because Lolo is killing the country and it will just make things very messy for us. And one thing I would also want to touch on, which is a contemporary issue, and your introduction being an young one now, listening and now it is right now nothing is happening. Gambia are living back in the 1926. Moy kuran sometimes ñeneen ñi duñ ko am and déggoon nañ fi bu yàggut nii ne the president Adama Barrow ak government am bi ñu ne am nañ enough electricity ba di may yeneen dëkk yi or wala di reserve. How do you tie this at people who are telling us that Adama Barrow mu ngi liggéey mu ngi def development mu ngi sampa tali yi if it is at a cost of nit ñi duñ mun a am electricity don't you think ne loolu dafa war a am a balance fi nga xam ne dañ war a am a sustainable electricity system at the same time nga yoon yi of course they need to be built communication is important what is your take on that and to add that to lump that up with the population talk uh, we heard some leaders says different things, or maybe the media says it. But I like one thing you said that not all our leaders are selfish, right? I like that. And what would you tell us if, as APP Sobeyaa, leadership is not choose, is not selected? What is the position? What's your position on that? I know it's a loaded question. Thank you.
Right. So just quickly with Narek, before we started importing energy from Senegal and the OMVG project, I think our production capacity was 70 megawatts hours. And this was not enough to cover the GBA area, which is the Greater Banjul area. And our method of production was quite expensive because we have to rely on either HFOs or LFOs, more heavy fuels, so light fuels to run our engines. And maintenance cost per operational cost per unit. At an economic point of view, it does make sense. You are sourcing electricity from a very cheaper rate, cheaper than your production cost, which was good. And that importation from Senegal actually helps stabilize the grid a lot. Why in the process, OMVG supply will start to flow through. I can sense there were some complacency issues there. Complacency in a sense, instead of revamping your domestic production, maintenance, making sure that you have an alternative immediately, something happens with the supply. The president was like, no, I'm not enough electricity, but you're not machine then fade. But you have to remember, before I'm enough, by face a machine, your machine was not even enough to cover everything because your demand was almost 100 megawatts plus. I'm on a production capacity of 75 megawatts, so I'm on deficiency of 25 megawatts. Then I'm another source, most of the is electricity. any logic, sensible person would be like, okay, our production cost has come down. We are making more revenue in terms of profits from where we are sourcing electricity now. How do we make sure the 25% deficiency, we build that up? In case something happens, then the country has an alternative, reliable grid to rely on. And all these things, it takes vision to think about. I heard from one of their supporters, they've bought an engine in an 8 megawatt engine or something like that in Birkama, but well, I've just heard that. I am yet to confirm that. But what I do understand, Moine, we have not actually improved on our capacity at the domestic level. And car power, which was pumping in almost 30 megawatts, that contract ended, and Dolu was no longer there. So the complacency feeling, Moine, you are entirely relying on Senegal and the OMVG for the sustenance of your businesses, your economic and electrical demands. So what happens if those grids goes down? Then the entire country goes down. And I think that it's a very bad way of doing business in government, and it's a very bad way of doing things. Probably they have to think about this and use this as a learning curve. Now, it is good to outsource energy where it is cheaper, but it is good to also have an alternative. And technically, any person, even if you are not technically minded, in Amne, so they may love it and say, I'm going generator backup because of how essential that electricity is. In terms of your other question, my what would lead us to if they are not selected as a flag bearer? Right. Anga dende one. So dem ci langi bari na ngembu sa nit ñi bakala tegal la harfa xuufay daw nga sooteeku ñaari outcome rek moo fa nekk nga enu waaji ba ci kaw wala waaji enu la ba ci kaw ñaari outcome si ni yëpp nag benn xarañte yaa moo la ko may sa mun a maneuver ak lan nga teg si table bi man my principle, and I always repeat these phrases for you guys: democracy is the competition of ideas. Right. So today, I want Esa to lead a coalition because I believe in his vision and in the vision of APP Sobeyaa, because vision between Nyoko and it's something that we build up together. It is not per se, okay, no, Esa Fabric did it. I always say that APP Sobeyaa, even if we put Muslim there, Muslim is going to be as phenomenal as SFR because we are a party that builds a vision together. And lucky for us, we have a very incredible guy that is leading that vision at this particular moment with SFR. Our role is how do we make sure we transmit this understanding that we have internally to those people that are not within the pictures. How do we share this vision with other Ghanaians? And other parties will also say the same thing. But the most important thing, Moine, the moment a political party has decided, I want to go and sit on a negotiating table to negotiate on a coalition to see if we can come together and rescue Gambia. So that alone, if you are not hypocritical, should also implies that I might lead it and I might not lead it. And I think APP Sobeyaa is very clear about it. As I said, they want a coalition based built on Gambia. They want a very fair process, and they want a process based on integrity. Because myself, Esa, and the rest of the executive, we wouldn't want to be in any coalition that we will not be able to defend in the future. We wouldn't want to sell anything to Gambians without thinking about it, without putting so much thought process behind it, that it eventually crumbles and we start scratching our heads. That is not who we are, and that is not our principle. So whatever coalition outcome we have, either ESA leads it or ESA do not lead it, but rest assured that it will be in the best interest of the Gambia. And I hope maybe my negotiation skills and Mustafa and Sira would be able to convince, the Yakumas, the Alaji Davos, and then the Dalibs and all that stuff to give ESA the leadership.
Thank you so much for that answer. That brings us to our next question. When Sobeyaa achieves its objectives, what kind of future do you envision for the country?
Rule of law, a very efficient Gambia, a very cohesive Gambia. And we need to understand that in order to progress as a society, we have to have rule of laws because human wants and human desires are unlimited. And these are fundamentals that are taught in economics. How do you cap those undesires, these unlimited desires? Is to bring rules. We need to have a country that is governed by rules because ethics doesn't care about morality because moral is subjective, it's aesthetic. It is my moral to say, nah, look, it is okay, I want to be a wife beater. It might not be your moral to say that you want to be a wife beater. But what makes us live cohesively in a society is to have an ethical rule that makes sure my moral, no matter what it is, doesn't infringe on another person's right. And this is one of the key things that Gambia desperately needs. We cannot have a country that is governed by rules on two tiers. These rules applies to these sets of people. These rules does not apply to these sets of people. These people can use their resources with impunity, and the other people cannot use their resources with impunity. We have to have a Gambia that has effective laws and effective rule of law. And once we are able to do this, then it becomes so much easier for my role in the future if I'm given such a role that if Musa decides to, you know, take things that do not belong to him, I know there is a rule of law that is going to be right and that is going to be just and that is going to put Musa in the right direction. Either, Yaya Jana's hotel or Musa to pay back the money, but we would definitely know there is something that is going on. And this is very strong for APP Sobeyaa, and we advocate for that. We want things that belongs to Gambia and to benefit all Gambians. And as I said this in our Congress in Farafenni, that look, I am not going to witch hunt anyone, but it is not also fair that we allow other people to use state resources without any reprimand. So you let Dallas Gambia, there is assured that Dallas when we come into power.
Thank you very much, Bob. I think they're gonna slogan bobu nono ne butu dufi reja. So that is a good one, and it's very appealing and very interesting when I hear the executive or the leadership of APP Sobeya when they speak. When they speak, they always come with brilliant ideas, have a very strong background. The final question that we will have for the show today is about the very man that why we have this conversation. Mooy Essa xam nañ ne comme li nga fi wax am na a lot of achievements li nga xam ne Gambian si duñ ko wéedi demal Google or nga dem LinkedIn or nga dem anywhere. He's a person that put na markam bi on the world stage with the Gambian flag. Nga buga ko, nga ñaaka ko buga, xam nga ne def na loolu and am na capabilities bi. Waaye yow Osbob, sa personal relationship bi, sa personal liggéey ak moom closely, wax ñu kan mooy Essa.
Well, hanga ma pai salum time MRC la nara wanema léegi ndeyjoor mun naa bañ a óolu càmmoñ waaye ngir ñoom ñaar ñëpp seen njëriñ pour ñaar ñu bokk liggéey ndax ndeyjoor du mun a def loo xam ne ni càmmoñ du ko nangu. My working relationship with Essa, I can say 80% of the time is purely professional. And when I said before earlier, the human ones are unlimited, I do apply the same thinking in politics. Somalia, let's put the rational first before the friendship. Now, if you look at everyone that is aspiring to lead our nation, who has most to lose? Because there you cannot build a reputation trying other leaders from other countries. You cannot build a reputation on the international justice front. You cannot build a reputation fighting for human rights cases. Then you elect the leader of a small nation like Gambia, that's not the Jalgati. Because there is life after presidency. So after the presidency, where do you go back? Who is going to appoint you? So man alone, lii rek tax na suma tëree ma nelaw because I believe ne I have a bargaining chip. Ne waa ji suñ ko joxee doole, no matter how influence of other people would come, no matter how nguur ne, there is always a check in place to make sure that he aligns. And to me, this is comfort. To me, this is assurance. So I hope other Gambians would see it that way. But people know Hamdani Jagan and Esa, they have very good testimonies of Esa. He's a very incredible person. Esa listens to you. Esa takes criticism constructively. Despite the fact that Nini and Lade or other stuff like Muslim, you know, I have disagreements with Esa in terms of policies and ideas. I'll be like, no, no, SJ, this is what we're going to do. And eventually, what the party wants, that's what he is going to do. So to me, it shows content. Okay? And these are the type of leaders that we want. Very strong leaders, very ethical leaders, leaders that are able to look at the hard truth, no matter how difficult it is, and be able to communicate that. When I was in a meeting with ESA with some university students that were asking for funds to go to Senegal, and they justified their trip, why they needed to do that, and all those things. But on top of that, they also required certain things to help aid their learning process in Gambia. So when they finished presenting, ESA was like, "Do you want the political version or do you want the truth? Which one do you want?" So they looked at each other and they go like, "Well, we want the truth." As I said, well, the political value version could be, okay, Degan Allen, good luck, make it $10,000. This is my contribution. But the truth is, these two scenarios in technique, which one would sit high in your scale of preference? And let's talk about that. Why do you want to spend resources going to Senegal for a 2-day trip? Whatever you're going to learn in Senegal, you could do that via Teams or the internet. And these resources, it could actually address this problem that you've just mentioned, Fini. So, for instance, if I have $20,000 to give you now, where would you put it? Are you going to Senegal and road trip and phone, or are you going to actually address this problem that is much more impactful in your career and in your education? Now, these are the type of leaders that we want. The leaders you are handling, they'll be able to sit with you and talk with you no matter how difficult the truth is. And we've already seen an episode of that during the TRRC. Esa was able to ask the difficult questions. Esa was able to do his job and understand that I have to do my job in the premises of the law and I have to do it to the best of my ability. Because above all, the law takes precedence. Now, this is what we need as a country. Buguno am leader bo hamne ni dafa wane dama rus Osbob because Osbob was there saying nice things to me, so Osbob can do anything he wants. Dama sama kolere. No. It has to be based on rule of law. It has to be based on principle. And we have that in ESA. So one, he has a lot to lose. So they dafa talk, def nenen no hamne ni warut ko def. Because that's basically his career over. So we already put, I'm not a guy, we put all the check measures around him. Oh, yeah, definitely check measures around him. Why do we want someone else? So this is my rationale because I like to be very logical and rational.
Yeah, thank you very much, Osbob. And the final thing, I think I want to agree with you on few things, which I also find very admirable in this guy as the kind of listener who he is, the kind of somebody, the humility that he have. He's so humble that he will listen to any idea, and his critical thinking process that he will dissect that within a very short period of time and then tell you the logic behind it, whether he agrees or not. And I like the fact what you said again. He doesn't like sugarcoating, and it doesn't matter from my experience whether uh, he knows Khadija, you work with him for 1,000 years. If the process is not followed, he is not with it. And I have witnessed that in so many times meetings with him. And the last one, the big one that you mentioned, if when he is wrong, he will admit it. he will apologize and he will correct it immediately. And I agree, we couldn't have anything better than that in terms of leadership.
I wanted to highlight something that Osbab previously stated that I think is pretty significant that people may not always pay too much attention to, which is the statement where you said that after presidency, you do have a life, right? And I think that that's really important for voters to think about because it further supports this idea of integrity, right? You have to engage with integrity because if not, what are you going to do after this whole thing is over with? So I really appreciate you highlighting that. And for us to close, I would like for you to give us a message for our voters. What would you like the viewers to be left with after watching this video?
Well, I hope at the end of the day, everyone would take some time to reflect from where we are and from where we come from until where we are now. Because in as much as we're in politics, our role is to go out there, canvass for vote, have a conversation. But the Gambia belongs to all of us. And at some point, we need to stop and think. Think beyond tribal lines, think beyond emotional sentiments, and just think about the type of country we want. We have Senegal, which is very close to us. I believe majority of Gambians travel into Senegal. Does it actually invoke anything into you that you've seen something beautiful in Senegal and start thinking, why can't we have this? You go to Guinea-Bissau. These are challenging times that we are facing in, and the information is already out there. All it takes is for people to take a break, sit down, listen, think about your future. We are not in opposition because we do not like Adama Barrow, because we think he's not governing the right way it should be. And in order to preserve our democracy, no matter how much you like Adama Barrow, 10 years is enough. Let us introduce that culture that I like Adama Barrow, President Barrow. I have done everything for President Barrow. I've campaigned with President Barrow. I've enjoyed President Barrow's government. But 10 years is enough. Barrow did say this in one of his interviews. When I saw I guess he told me, I'm them ideas in the so léegi toll na foo xam ne nii bum déglu ñu ko wóor because ñooñu seen interest la gaay nekk di protect. And this is one of the issues in presidency and in African leadership. Léegi the leader just becomes symbolic. The people around the leader, each protecting an economic interest, these are the people that keeps putting pressure. Waaye suma bopp ma la gënal du bañ naa la. And if Barrow or anyone in the NPP is listening to this, look, we are tired. Ñun du mun a ooyee suñ bopp pan-Africanist, du mun a ooyee suñ bopp a progressive nation every time you watch a president mu daw mu dem. Like, Barrow, just step down gracefully, bull them for your third term bid. Let the Gambian people choose for their leaders. And if Barrow is not graceful enough to accept that and to do that, let the Gambian people decide for themselves what is best for them. And I absolutely have trust in our leadership. I have trust in my party and in my party's leadership, but equally working with those that are in the opposition, I am very much hopeful that we have very strong alternatives to what we currently have, which is President Barrow. And I want Gambians to reflect on that. And I want Gambians to just sit down, pause, and think. Because there is always continuity in government. Barrow bu mu ñëwee demul mu jël peel ak caterpillar dem xoos tali yu Yaya Jammeh def. Demul mu daaneel schools yu Yaya Jammeh def. He built up. And he built on top of where Jammeh stops. And the next government, do you know hostile Barrow or now they are going to make it better, build on. And this is how people should see governance. That it's always going to be continuity. This person will always do things, feel a more stop, a notch further, and the next government will always take it a notch further. So Gambians should start seeing governance that way. And then, hopefully by December, we'll be able to have a new administration in place.
Well, with that, I'd like to thank our audience. I'd like to thank the president of the U.S. chapter, Muslim Jallo, and I'd like to thank our guest, the spokesperson for Sobeyaa, Ousainou Bobb. Thank you guys so much for being here, and thank you to all the viewers, and we look forward to seeing you next week.